Hello, I'm Juliet Parker, the Director of ALNAP. Welcome to our Learning Curve event, Breaking Boundaries, Local and National Actors' Engagement in the Humanitarian-Development-Peace Nexus at the Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week. In today's world, where crises are increasingly more complex and interconnected, the role of local and national actors in addressing needs that span the three dimensions of the nexus has never been more crucial. They are the first responders who stay with communities post-crisis and are the backbone of sustainable peace efforts. Yet often their contributions in the HDP Nexus are overlooked. This event is an opportunity to spotlight their work. We will hear practical examples of community-driven HDP Nexus approaches from local and national actors. We also aim to explore what can be done to better support locally led Nexus work, especially considering the recent funding cuts to aid. We're delighted to have you here with us today and looking forward to rich discussions. But first, let's watch a video summarising the key takeaways and recommendations from ALNAP's new research that puts local and national actors at the centre of the Nexus discussion.
Many local and national actors are doing work that cuts across the humanitarian development and peace sectors. Yet their Nexus-style work is not widely documented and shared, as the focus of the evidence based on the Nexus is still largely on the international system. Our recent research shows that while the international system still struggles to apply the HDP Nexus approach, local and national actors have been putting it into practice for many years. So how are they doing it? We want to make the voices of local and national actors more visible in the HDP Nexus discussion by highlighting their perspectives and experiences in designing and implementing joint-up programs. Local and national actors conceive of the HDP Nexus approach differently from the international system. They employ wide-ranging programming approaches that combine humanitarian development and peace dimensions. These approaches do not often use the language of the HDP Nexus, but serve similar aims. Their approach is built in real-life community needs. A civil society organization in Yemen describes it best.
Our approach is inspired by the field and community practices, informed by the real-life needs, experiences, and insights of the communities we serve, ensuring that our interventions are practical, inclusive, and grounded in the realities of those most affected.
Local and national actors' Nexus-style programming is a result of their interactions with communities and communities' holistic needs and vulnerabilities, rather than being driven by international policies and frameworks. They place great emphasis on fostering local ownership and sustainability of results by engaging communities in analyzing risks, vulnerabilities, and drivers of fragility, and in the design of programs through participatory processes. Community inputs may not fit usual intervention designs or sit neatly within humanitarian development and peace boundaries. Take the perspective from a national NGO in Afghanistan.
On the ground, the people are also asking for flexibility. And flexibility means that there should be a lot of opportunity for supporting the solution, but it should be more based on the need of the people. And the definition may be different for everyone. But what we see on the ground, we know that it's not only about the development, it's not only about the humanitarian.
The Nexus work of local and national actors often includes a focus on peace programming and gender inclusion, elements that the international system struggles to incorporate. A women-led organization in Iraq explains.
As part of our commitment to supporting women and girls, we provide immediate assistance to address their basic needs, including legal and psychological support, as well as mental health services. Simultaneously, we actively work on empowering women to take on leadership roles and participate in decision-making processes within their communities. This multifaceted approach ensures that we not only address their immediate concerns, but also empower women to thrive and become more resilient in the long term, contributing to their well-being and progress.
Local and national actors are finding creative ways to fund and implement Nexus-style programming, despite limited access to non-siloed and quality funding, and donors or funders' rigid due diligence processes.
The form and the things that they require for us to just apply for any grant, it's very tedious. And you need to have someone to do that effort and lead that effort. And from the start of 2023, we were very encouraged to work as a consortium, which is something I think has worked very well in Iraq, and sharing that experience with multiple NGOs and local NGOs. These partnerships enable us to leverage a wide range of expertise, resources, and local knowledge, allowing us to create holistic and sustainable programs that make a positive impact in crisis-affected communities.
Despite these challenges, we have seen signs of positive results from local and national actors' efforts, which are very much focused on the impact for communities. However, longer-term results of this joined-up programming are not yet measured and documented systematically. As a national NGO in Myanmar illustrates,
Different donors have different monitoring practices. It's not integrated, and it's an issue for the local partners to practice monitoring. It's difficult still to measure the actual real change or the outcomes of the work that you're doing. Most of the indicators came from the national level and not from the field level. That's why the indicators didn't reflect the actual changes.
the international system can learn a lot from the Nexus-style programming approaches of local and national actors. If international actors want to better engage with locally led HDP Nexus work, they could focus on showcasing and learning from local and national actors' work on the HDP Nexus, involving local and national actors in the design and measurement of HDP Nexus programming, and putting more funding in the hands of local and national actors for HDP Nexus programming.
As a local organization, we work closely with our local community. In the event of a crisis, we experience the same effects as this community, and we are in the front line to provide first aid even before the international organizations. At the end of the crisis, we are always present in the community to continue with development activities or the transition from emergency to post-crisis to development.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, wherever you're logging in from at this moment. My name is Miguel Biento, a research officer at ALNAP, joining you from Manila, Philippines. In this next section of our event, we have invited local and national actors to share their experiences and insights on what working across the humanitarian development and peace sector looks like. Let me introduce our speakers for this first segment. First, we have Regina Nanette Antiquisa, the Executive Director of EcoWeb, a 20-year-old organization based in the Philippines. She has over 30 years of experience doing development, humanitarian, and peace-building work, and is actively involved in various advocacy platforms at the national and global levels. We also have Vilas Shivangi Shavda, who serves as the head of programs at the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction, or GNDR. She brings with her over 2 decades of dedicated experience in the field and is deeply committed to empowering and enhancing the capacities of local CSOs. Our third speaker is Nadine Saba, a co-founder and director of ACAR Network for Development, an organization based in Lebanon. She's a lawyer by profession and has 18 years of experience working with NGOs in Lebanon, implementing a variety of development and humanitarian programs for Syrian refugees, as well as women, children, and youth. Unfortunately, Nadine couldn't join us live, but she has kindly agreed to record her responses to our questions, so we will be showing those to you instead later. My first question is for Nanette. In our conversation for this research, you described the work that you do as the HDP Nexus in action. Can you share about your approach to work that you think embodies the Nexus?
First, thank you, May, and to all for having me here. And good day, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Yes, at EcoWeb, we bring the HDP Nexus to life by ensuring that communities are not just beneficiaries, but leaders of their own response, recovery, and resilience building. When communities have resources and decision-making power, they naturally integrate humanitarian development and peace actions in ways that are adaptable and sustainable. Siloed approaches often fail to address the complexity of crises, but when communities take the lead, they organically bridge humanitarian response, long-term development, and peace building. One of our key strategies is the survivor and community-led crisis response approach. Instead of externally designed programs, we allow communities to identify their own priorities and access microgrants to take action. This ensures they move beyond short-term survival and invest in long-term resilience. After the Marawi siege in 2017, for example, when humanitarian agencies completed their emergency response, displaced communities did not stop there. Through community-led approach, internally displaced persons initiated livelihood restoration to rebuild their economic stability, advocated for their rights to ensure long-term solutions, and worked to strengthen social cohesion in post-conflict environment. This demonstrates that HDP Nexus in action. Humanitarian response, supporting recovery, development ensuring stability, and peace building creating the foundation for long-term resilience. Our approach also strengthens the connections necessary for making the HDP Nexus operational. We build vertical connections by linking communities with government agencies and institutions to ensure they receive institutional support. Currently, we partner with 6 local government units in promoting community-led approach. By embedding this model into local programming, policies, and budgets in the local government, we ensure that humanitarian action transitions into long-term development and peace-building efforts. We strengthen horizontal connections by fostering peer-to-peer collaboration among community groups. An example is in Las Nieves, where heavy floods would isolate vulnerable communities for 1 to 2 weeks' time. They were affected by LPE trough and shoreline in 2024. With the use of flexible microgrants, community groups have implemented interconnected projects towards building community resilience, such as livestock agro-supply store, rice trading, enhancing farm production, repair shop for motorcycles, and community volunteer groups strengthening capacity to provide emergency response when floods occur, among others. These initiatives aim that communities survive even if isolated during heavy flooding, a usual occurrence in their area. Another example is in an indigenous community in Agusan. We first supported them in 2017 when flash flood hit many communities. Based on the recommendations, we later developed a long-term project in 2022 to help them secure land rights, strengthen tribal governance, and build sustainable livelihoods. When another extreme weather event hit them in 2024, flexible humanitarian funding complemented ongoing development programs, allowing them to address other needs like post-harvest losses and improve transport of communities along riverbank, among others. These efforts also fostered community cohesion, crucial in an area affected by insurgency. This example demonstrates how flexible funding and sustained support make the HDP Nexus a reality. Yeah, we view humanitarian aid is short term, while development and peace building funding are long term but often rigid and slow. The integration of funding sources ensures that humanitarian interventions don't just meet immediate needs but also contribute to long term resilience and peace. Through these approaches, we at EcoWeb put the HDP Nexus into practice by ensuring that communities lead the process, institutions support them, and funding mechanisms work together to sustain their progress. When local actors are in control, humanitarian aid doesn't just provide relief, it becomes a stepping stone toward lasting development and peace. Thank you, May.
Thanks, Annette, for sharing those solid practical examples of Nexus in action through your SCLR, through using the SCLR approach. I had a similar question for Nadine. People often find the HDP Nexus as a vague concept and don't really see how this fits with practical programming in communities. So I asked her if she can talk about their approach to programming that focuses on women and girls and children, and why she thinks this is an example of that practical Nexus style work.
It's interesting to see that you've qualified this concept as vague. Vague for whom? Is it vague for the people who are on the field, or is it vague for the people who are trying to analyze what is being done on the field? Because in my perspective, on the field, it's not vague at all. For people to think about Nexus is the most natural thing to do. And you would notice that a simple action is not enough to get rid of those malpractices or those patterns. So if I want to speak more about protection and around the work with children, women, and girls, we're working with them as the right holders, we're working with their caregivers, we're working with the community, and we're working with the gatekeepers. If we were only to work in a very simple humanitarian way of doing things, we would only be doing life-saving. We really want to think in a solid way, in a grounded way, on how to avoid the repetition of these issues, on how to avoid the causes. We have to go back to the root. And this cannot be only a humanitarian intervention. This would need us to look into the sustainable development goals. This would require us to work around economic empowerment. This would require us to work around social behavioral change. This would require us to work around having a stable environment, a stable community that understands the protection priorities and values the importance and role of women, youth, adolescents, and children. And this is not a pure humanitarian intervention. This is a way of linking the dots together. This is a way of looking into what we have on the ground and see what are the solutions that are best fit to engage with the community, to change the behavior, to ensure that women, children, and adolescents are safe. People come to us with needs, and they don't qualify those needs. They don't categorize their needs. For us, it's their need, and for them, it's a need they want us to respond to. So this categorization, this qualification in terms of humanitarian, development, peace building, does not apply to people. This silos perspective is what is leading us to a repetition of crises, to a repetition of, I would say, not solutions that are not fit for purpose.
Again, thanks, Nadine, for sharing those practical examples, specifically focusing on your work with women and girls in Lebanon. I'd like to turn to Shivangi now. In your many years of working with local CSOs, what locally driven approaches have you seen really working for practical results across the HDP Nexus?
Yeah, thank you, May, and good day to everybody. And really happy to be here to share some of our learnings as GNDR. So from GNDR's perspective, one of the important aspects which we have learned and which has played a very critical role when it comes to dealing with HDP Nexus in particular is ensuring systematic collaborations between local communities, local civil society organizations, and local government who are directly affected by humanitarian crisis, developmental challenges, and conflict dynamics. So as what Nadine said, that at the local level, there's no silos, they all come together. And I think that's what we feel is that our experience says that the stronger this collaboration at the local level, you have the best outcomes when it comes to strengthening interconnectedness between humanitarian development and peace building processes. Now, having this very strong foundation of collaboration at the local level, that has supported us in many ways. One is acceptance of community ownership and leadership. For example, when we were working in Bangladesh in one of our programs, this joint collaboration actually developed a local level civic engagement platform for them to come together to discuss not only problems related to displacement, but also problems related to the development. And it is still working, and it is still very, very important platform now at the local level for even the local government to come and interact with the communities as and when needed. So there is an acceptance of this community ownership. The second one is that having context-based solutions beyond short-term aid. So with strong collaboration, the solutions are not only locally appropriate, but also ensures that they are leading to long-term risk-informed development, which are informed by the risk of these communities, but they are rooted in local knowledge, culture, and needs, making them more effective and sustainable. And there are numerous examples that I can give you, how that this whole cycle from response to recovery and to rehabilitation, and this whole thing about building back better, even within the fragile and climate impacted, has been successful. And the last thing is about strengthening local systems. So instead of bypassing local governance and organizations, these approaches are mutually beneficial because everybody kind of builds their capacities, learns from their experiences, enhances resilience and self-reliance to manage crisis and long-term development in a very collective manner. I can give you experience from Mali. They worked very closely with the local actors, and the community established a conflict prevention local strategies, which local government was also part of. And they have been successful in saving the youth from the antisocial outfits through constructive dialogue. And this is where the indigenous knowledge, this is where the traditional mechanisms really played very well. And sitting with the local governance, it actually kind of have been the most successful model. Now, there are many examples like what we heard from Nadine as well, and also from Nanette. In Iraq and Yemen, we have seen lots of community-led peace committees. They work together to resolve disputes over scarce resources or strengthening social cohesion. Similarly, with Ivory Coast, where women-led cooperatives introduced climate-smart agriculture linking humanitarian food aid with long-term food security. So these are some of the few examples that I can give. Now, why locally led approaches matter for HDP? One, of course, that it ensures sustainability by leveraging existing knowledge and the systems, and also understanding the social context, because in HDP, when you are talking about peace building, when you are talking about development, the society plays a very important role, and the social cohesion really plays a very, very important role. And they enhance efficiency by reducing reliance on external actors and minimizing duplication of efforts. So this is towards being more self-reliant. The most important part is that they build trust and legitimacy, making interventions more culturally appropriate and widely accepted. So bringing this whole aspect of collaboration in our viewpoint has kind of facilitated, shifting of power, or shifting the power dynamics from externally driven aid to community-led, community-driven solutions, fostering self-reliance, resilience, and long-term peace building. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Shivangi, for pointing out the importance of building relationships and building those collaborations with other actors and focusing on strengthening local knowledge and systems. I think those are very important in implementing the HDP Nexus. Now, I'd like to circle back to Nadine to ask what has been their biggest barriers in implementing HDP Nexus programming, and how have they managed to address these in their work?
So as I mentioned before, it's sad that we're going back to the Nexus when we're having issues of financing, because Nexus should have been the norm. And in this sense, I'm again sad to say that funding has been an issue, has been a barrier. But it's not only funding. For me, it's the rigidity of the funding. It's the fact that I have an envelope and another envelope, and the two are not collaborating together. But this is not the only barrier. The second barrier is how we are envisioning Nexus. The way we see the different interventions is very linear, in a sense that something finishes and then something else starts. But this is not how it is on the field. I mean, the engagement between the humanitarian development, peace building, and potentially as well climate is not done in a very, chronographic way, not very linear, and it's not done the same in the different contexts. What works in Lebanon might not work in Myanmar. And the way I envision the different interventions within the Nexus approach cannot be the same in Lebanon as it is in Sudan, because it has to be very much contextualized. However, what is happening is, for policymakers, for decision makers, it is a bit difficult to grasp that on the field, things do not go as envisioned. Things do not go in a very linear and systematic way. Sometimes you cannot wait for a development actor to come. You cannot wait for a peace building actor to come. And then at the same time, if you put the local and national organizations within your own way of doing things, within your own ways of deciding, within the policy-making process, you would be more prone to understand how the people are perceiving us, how the people are perceiving our interventions. How were we able to go around it? It's because we try to leverage the different interventions and the different funds that we have from different donors within a specific area. What makes you go around it is how much, as an organization, you're rooted, how much you get the trust of the community, and how much you get the trust of your partners as well, that they trust you to ensure that you're integrating these two approaches within your intervention on the field.
Indeed, these are also the same barriers we heard from local actors who we spoke to in this research. Now, I also wanted to point out that most of the local and national actors we heard from in this study were CSOs and national NGOs rather than government actors. Nanette, you mentioned that your work involves a lot of collaboration with government actors. What role do they play in the work that you do?
Yeah, thanks, May. Yeah, in our work, we view that government engagement is essential for scaling and sustaining community-led approaches within the HDP Nexus. While civil society organizations and local NGOs often take the lead in piloting innovative, people-centered responses, governments, we view, hold the mandate, policy influence, and resources needed to ensure long-term impact. Currently, for the survivor and community-led crisis response approach, we work closely with 6 local government units as a pilot to integrate this approach for community resilience building. Our goal is for governments to be active co-creators of locally led solutions. Through this collaboration, local governments, in these pilot communities, they provide 50-50 counterpart for the micro grants, ensuring their investment in community-led resilience actions. We conduct co-designing workshops and training on community-led approaches to enhance the capacity of local government personnel and CSO partners. We also establish a composite project management and implementation team that facilitates, reviews, and approves projects from the communities, ensuring transparency and allowing local governments to see the value of community-led initiatives. And beyond implementation, we work with government partners on policy advocacy. So those like-minded in the government to institutionalize community-led approaches in disaster risk reduction and resilience building frameworks. A key milestone in this effort was the participation of the mayor in one of our partner LGUs at the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on DRR in 2024 held here in Manila. Mayor Karen, our partner, shared how integrating community-led action into government disaster strategies has strengthened local resilience. Our experience has shown that when governments shift from a top-down service delivery model to an enabling role, communities become proactive agents of their own recovery and development. However, of course, bureaucratic processes within the government system and rigid donor structures remain a challenge, often limiting the flexibility needed for true community leadership. Moving forward, strengthening policy integration, securing institutionalized financing mechanism, and deepening commitments to localization will be key to making government a stronger partner in bottom-up resilience efforts. Thank you.
Great points on the important role of governments in advancing HDP Nexus approaches, which Shivangi also emphasized earlier in her discussion. Thanks again to our three speakers for bringing your rich experiences into this critical discussion. Listening to your practical examples of Nexus programming made me think about how it would really be nice to document all of your learnings and good practices so that those who are still challenged or struggling to implement it can learn from your examples. And that concludes our first panel. Thanks again to our speakers. I will now hand over the floor to my colleague, Jennifer Doherty, for our next panel discussion. Over to you, Jen.
Great. Welcome to our second discussion. I'm Jennifer Doherty, Senior Research Fellow with ALNAP. So we've just heard about the useful practical approaches some local and national actors are taking to their work across the HDP Nexus. And I can see from the chat how useful people found those reflections. So now we're going to consider how international actors can best support locally driven approaches and how they can better consider the leadership of local actors in their attempts to bridge these different systems. So I'm pleased to be joined by Corey Stedman and Marie Cruz. Corey is the Senior Officer on Localization for the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. She led the work of IFRC as co-convener of the Grand Bargain Localization Workstream, and she'll be coordinating the new community of practice on localization. And Marie is the Chief Advisor in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Denmark with the Department for Humanitarian Action and Civil Society. She also has experience with the EU, Danish civil society organizations, and the UN across a range of policy areas, including localization and peace. So we're delighted to have you both here. Now, your organizations have each been thinking about bringing together the conversations around localization and the HDP Nexus for a while now. Back in 2023, you co-hosted a conference with the US focusing on that intersection. It would be great to hear your perspectives on why you think this overlap between the two agendas is important. And have you seen any progress since you started these discussions? I think, Marie, would you like to go first with this one?
Absolutely, thank you. And first, a big thank you to ALNAP, of course, for inviting Denmark to join the session today. And it's good to see many familiar faces around this conversation. So I think, Jen, in terms of your question, so we actually had a recommendation from the conference you mentioned in 2023, which was instituting a culture shift toward local leadership across the system. And I think this somehow fits toward that. But this was really about creating the best possible conditions for locally led action across the Nexus. And that it meant, in order to do so, this means working on shifting collective mindsets and culture. And I think while localization should, of course, and which we're also a proponent of, see much more traction in terms of outcomes and actual results, which is the more action, less talking standpoint, so to say. We also think it's key to withhold sustained interaction and dialogue on localization in general. And I think this is whether we're focusing on the Nexus, the more humanitarian aspects, or regarding more long-term development work or climate even. So just to say that while we're all pushing for results, the action taking, we need to sustain interaction and dialogue at the same time. And I think on progress, I guess I think we see progress in trying to move ahead on both counts, but with the need, of course, for more action taking, so to say. And I think just to leave you with a concrete action, I mean, after the conference we held, that, and from a donor perspective, so Denmark, along with Switzerland and the UK, worked on developing a donor guidance note for promoting inclusive and locally led action through humanitarian pooled funds. I just think this is just one of many examples or concrete examples on how we've moved forward from conversing to something concrete. So more examples, but I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Marie. And Corey, would you like to add to that?
Thanks, Jen. So just wanted to say background on the conference. So the Copenhagen conference actually was a follow through to the Grand Bargain Localization Works team efforts in bringing together actors across the HDP plus. I say plus because we wanted to include the climate action sector there as well, to talk about localization. Because as the term localization was popularized by the Grand Bargain, earlier discussions were mainly focused on humanitarian action and within the sector. Although I have to acknowledge localization or its derivative was also being discussed in the development and even in climate, but they were siloed as it was in kind of programming. So the then Grand Bargain co-conveners, specifically for IFRC, we initially approached this issue from the perspective or from the need that or the potential to leverage investment across the nexus to support long-term capacity strengthening of local actors, because this was considered as a major gap, the funding for long-term institutional capacity strengthening of local actors, because that is one area where humanitarian funding really is almost always kind of difficult to kind of justify. Just to add on some specific kind of like, a general statement of the progress since Copenhagen. As I've seen this, and I've been engaged in some, there's been definitely a lot of more studies, discussions, commitments, and I've seen some action as well in the field, in particular around improving coordination and collaboration among the Nexus actors. But on this, the most important thing is that there is now emphasis and a deliberate action on local actor participation and leadership.
Great, thank you both. It's useful to hear about the momentum from that point and a mix of dialogue, some concrete action, and also the important need for that culture shift, I think, speaking to some of those silos noted in the first session. So now, Corey, drawing on your experience with the IFRC or with the Grand Bargain, what do you think is needed to create more progress on a localized HDP nexus? And do you have plans for future work on this issue?
Maybe I'll start with the plans, and before saying what are those other kind of steps. In terms of next steps, so while the Grand Bargain Localization work stream formally closed in April last year, Community of Practice on Localization is in development, and it will be launched early next month. I foresee Marie here, Denmark, and a few other members of the work streams were kind of coordinating the work on this. And then for this COP, Plan COP, the idea is around initially, so we're looking at addressing barriers and scaling implementation of localization, including those specific on localization. So these are initial areas, focus areas that have been identified, say initial emphasis on that, around investment in capacity strengthening, around equitable partnership, improved funding and local leadership. So those are the initial focus areas been identified. And also, I think outside of the Grand Bargain, I think it is worth mentioning that last year, in October last year, the 34th International Conference of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, there was a resolution that was passed. The resolution is called Enabling Local Leadership, Delivery and Capacity for Principled Humanitarian Action and Strengthening Resilience. So this resolution was adopted by consensus by all state parties to the Geneva Convention, IFRC, ICRC, and the 191 national societies. I think it's important to note here about all the states parties to the Geneva Convention, because so these are all the countries. So not just, as you know, currently the signatories to the Grand Bargain are mostly only the donor countries. So following this resolution, the moment there are now several states and national societies, together or individually, they have submitted pledges, and these pledges are concrete, measurable, and action-oriented commitments on issues of their priority in support of their resolution. So going back to what is needed to bring progress, as I've said, and there's been a lot of discussion, studies, and commitment, and you've heard from the local actors earlier. They're very articulate and made very clear real life examples and evidence on their work on nexus and localization. So I think moving forward, the localization agenda, including around the nexus, I feel that there are no new lessons learned. In fact, I feel like I'm sort of kind of wanting to kind of say that, perhaps there's even no longer need for even more evidence to to strengthen the business case, but rather what is needed is maybe I'll just kind of emphasize 2 points from or add to the points that was raised by our earlier local actor speakers. But this in particular in relation to what the international actors can do or should be doing. So that's one, it's around working towards more strategic and collective action. And two, to move away from supply-driven programming and these efficiency models that sideline local actors and communities. Or to put it simply, have the courage to let go of the power and be accountable.
It's a really useful point, Corey, and I think is particularly on whether there are really lessons to be learned or whether we just need to do some of the things that have been spoken about. So some important commitments, and we'll be looking out for that future work with the COP. Marie, so I have to mention that at the moment, people's minds are understandably on the donor cuts, which are affecting not just the work humanitarians do with communities, but peace and development action as well. And as the aid system is in this situation of shock and prioritization, do we risk losing progress on localizing the nexus? Or are there opportunities for embedding this approach as these three systems move forward in this new reality?
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is a very timely question, of course, as we are still sort of seeing events globally unfold from major changes and shifts to the system lately. And I think there's, of course, an ongoing effort to try to analyze these effects from all ends. And while we also try and manage whatever can be managed in the short term, but also trying to look ahead toward medium and long term. And I think we do this, of course, while we don't yet have the full picture. At least that's what we're grappling with. But we do know that many changes have very serious consequences on the ground. We're standing on a burning platform, so to speak. And this means, of course, that the need for action taking is quite urgent also. So I think if you can, on a positive note, if that's how it can be put forth, or maybe looking for opportunities in this, I think the urgency of current affairs, so to say, underpins and sort of highlights further the need for localization or local leadership, however you label it, right? That to achieve results, we truly need to factor in localized approaches. So I think it's the idea of localization as an answer to many of our problems. And I think this talk of change needed toward the system reform is not new per se, but I think that the acceleration of that conversation is now front-loaded, so to speak. And I think there is a potential for empowerment somewhere in trying to redefine perhaps our collective space. So I think concretely, and this is from a donor perspective, of course, that focus could be on better collaboration. I mean, I know this is not a new thing, but there's emphasis here between donors, for example, but also more widely speaking, considering a community of practice on localization as well. I think there's a need to come together even more, consider how we can organize in a more useful manner at all levels and really see what are the best avenues or the best platforms, how could that be? And I think in this, it's key to focus on what works, of course. So whether it's coordinated country-based approaches, quality funding, pool funding, for example, as I highlighted previously, or focusing on the role of intermediaries, risk sharing, and so forth. I think we should be focusing efforts toward that. But in all that, of course, there's an increased emphasis that we really have to figure out how to place local actors even more in front. So I think, and just to end on this, but Danish priority areas, even before January 1st, for implementing local leadership in practice, was focused on 3 areas, and one was supporting documentation and establishment of best practices. Another was the development and dissemination of our own approaches, but also highlighting others. And third, advocacy and engagement in relevant international fora. And I think these overarching priority areas, we have more urgency now, but they still reflect the necessary engagement needed. So I think, let me end on saying, stay coordinated and engaged. I think this is key, especially in these trying times. Thanks.
Thanks, Maria. A really useful reflection on some of the options to maximize the potential for localization and other reform agendas in this challenging time, while things continue to evolve day by day, and thinking about some collective action to move things forward and not taking the foot off the pedal when things get challenging. I think that's as much time as we have for this particular discussion, so we'll hold it there, but I can see you both in a couple of moments for some Q&A with the other panelists. Okay, so a very quick transition, and we've now brought all our speakers from the 2 sessions together to answer some of your questions. And those that we don't have time to answer, we'll try to respond to when we send you the event recording afterwards. So we don't have a lot of time, and I'm grateful if the speakers can keep their responses relatively tight. So I believe my first question is for Shivangi. So how does GNDR support the sharing of different locally driven approaches, and how could international actors better engage with that learning?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, for that question. So as you know, GNDR is a network of more than 2,000 local civil society organization. And as network, GNDR acts as a bridge and a catalyst between all the stakeholders, including global stakeholders, ensuring that these local driven approaches are shared, scaled, and strengthened. For us, and the earlier panelists elaborated on localization, for us, it's just not about transferring funds to the local civil society organizations, but also creating an enabling environment for these local stakeholders to be part of the decision-making processes. And we facilitate it through different channels, let's put it like that. We have programs such as Views from the Frontline, which is a flagship program where we collect the perspectives of the local communities, local CSOs and local government, the challenges and the barriers that they face at the local level. And we try to influence the policies and practices through these evidences which are coming from the local communities. We have different knowledge sharing platforms internally for this 2,000 civil society organizations. Of course, we have a community platform which helps them to kind of share and learn within themselves. But as a part of other mechanisms, we have national coordination meetings of our members with other key stakeholders at the national level and at the regional level, which facilitates peer learning and cross learning and exchanges. We have something called as Local Leadership Academy as well, which gives opportunity for not only strengthening the thematic areas of the civil society organizations, but also bring the expertise from the international actors, and through this Local Leadership Academy impart them both thematic and organizational strengthening capacities of this local civil society organizations. And one of the important arms that we have, where we really closely interact with the international actors, is the global policy influencing place, platforms such as Global Platform Corps, HLPF, and others, where our work is to amplify the voices of these local communities, be it if it is a HDP Nexus or early warning for all, or any other subject that we think where we need to intervene and bring the voices of these communities at the global level. So all our programs actually feed into the policy discussions. That said, how international actors can better engage with GNDR's learning, I think from our perspective, the international actors can drive systemic change, ensuring that we are just not talking about these frameworks, but we are actually kind of bringing ourselves close to the lived-in experiences of these communities on the front line of the crisis. And that brings me to other point where we would like them to support the local leadership by bringing all this technical expertise, demystifying science, and promoting innovations through funding at the local level and enabling community-driven approaches. Also, we would like them to use our evidences for larger influence at the global level, regional level, wherever they find that it is useful for them to use it. And then let's really shy away from project to project, because I always say don't build island of excellences. We require much more than that. We are into this we are facing so many challenges even within while we are talking, and it's important that we really kind of shy away from developing island of excellences and really look at the problems holistically and really in scaled up and more strategic interventions at the local level. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks. It was great to hear about the importance of those multiple channels for the voice of different local actors and leveraging that evidence at different levels. I now have a question for Nanette. We have a question on how do you engage with peace-building actors and how do you mainstream conflict sensitivity beyond just do no harm?
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for Anna for the question. So I'd like to answer first on the mainstreaming of conflict sensitivity beyond do no harm. One of the key strategy of EcoWeb in this HDP Nexus and especially humanitarian crisis is this so-called survivor and community-led crisis response approach. The approach in itself, one of the real principle is really like ensuring do no harm. But it's not only do no harm, but beyond do no harm by ensuring inclusivity, culture sensitivity, community leadership in finding solutions, including finding solutions to conflict that may arise in the implementation of programs and even in their community action. And enabling community also to address the root causes of their vulnerability by harnessing the community leadership and promoting community and social cohesion. We partner, and as our peace, EcoWeb is also as mentioned, we are having this HDP Nexus. We do humanitarian development and peace building, so we are actually also involved in peace building work, and we collaborate with different peace building actors in our network. And we encourage actually this cross collaboration, this vertical and horizontal linkaging even between communities and between us and other actors. So that's how we integrate all of this in our HDP Nexus approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Nana. I think we hear a lot that it's difficult to get the P in the HDP Nexus, but it sounds like you've got a lot of strategies for doing that and engaging communities in it. My next question is for Corey. How can communities be engaged to contribute to and benefit from the collective outcomes of larger HDP Nexus frameworks like national processes?
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so I'm going to answer this from a perspective of from the localization or locally led action agenda. Local actors in all their diversity. So I'm speaking here of the local, the national NGOs, the national Red Crescent, national societies, community-based organizations, women-led organization, etc., etc. So with the notion that, of course, we believe that they are better able to represent the voice and interests of the communities. So if local actors are able to really, the local actor leadership can be pushed in the coordination and decision-making mechanisms and platform, especially in relation to the Nexus, as there are, I'm sure, several existing platforms and mechanisms in country, then that's one way, essentially, to ensure that the the communities are better represented and their interest, from their voice and interest. The second point is around, in a way, you can approach this from an accountability kind of perspective. So essentially saying that, the all the humanitarian actors and a number of development actors as well, and I would say across the nexus, they have made a lot of really kind of commitments. They have pronouncements and commitments, and even some plans and policies on really advancing locally led action. So I think for communities, you have the power to kind of demand accountability from these actors, from these stakeholders.
Thanks, Corey. That's useful. I'm going to try to rapidly get through a couple more questions before we end. So one for Marie, back on that point about the cuts to aid. So from Abby Wood, there's a scenario where local organizations could receive more funding, as the grand bargain is always pushed for. But what should this relationship look like? And maybe we can hear if anybody else has advice for donors as well.
Well, absolutely. I can start a little bit. I think it's a very good question, one that we're also grappling with at our end, right? And I'm not sure I have a very good answer, really. But I think also as a donor, as Denmark, I mean, our capacity to manage direct support to local actors is very limited, right? So I think, and I'm not sure the avenues for improving this, but never say never. But that's also why, so the more coordinated we can be, the more, let's say, precise. I mean, looking at country flagship initiatives, better donor coordination, more quality funding. I mean, pool funds, again, is a good example of where to further this. But I think, as Denmark, we're giving 70% of our humanitarian funding as multi-year funding. All our contributions are non or softly earmarked to a country operation. And, also increasingly, we're using pool funds. So I really appreciate the question. I think it's one that, especially from the donor side, that we, in light of the current situation as well, need to sort of rally around and see, what are actually opportunities for this. And there's, in that is also the whole intermediary question and so forth. But no doubt that, more quality funding for local actors is needed. So it's just the ways in which we sort of, let's say, arrive at that place, right? Yeah.
A lot of useful ideas there and more to do. Thanks, Marie. Just to close with bringing back in the voices of our local and national actor representatives, I have a question both for Shivangi and Nanette, just in one couple of words maybe. What do you think is the one key factor that could better support local actors in their Nexus programming efforts? So I'm going to ask Nanette very quickly, a couple of seconds.
Yeah, I think especially in the context of cutting aid, one key factor would be like greater access of local actors to flexible multi-year funding that allows for adaptive, locally driven and sustainable solutions defined and prioritized by affected communities across humanitarian response, development, and peace-building programming. But as Corey mentioned, this requires power holders to let go and share their power. And I just would like to mention some of our partners, we think, development and humanitarian, already embrace this principle, enabling actually EcoWeb to have this HDP Nexus and community-led approach on the ground. I hope more donors and funders will support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Nanette. And Shivangi, very quickly, the final word.
I think over and above what Nanette has stated in that sense, I think we need to also have now political will. Unless we have a political will, we'll not be able to scale it up because of scarcity of funding, resources, etc., etc. So localization is possible. Please provide space for the local actors to be part of the decision-making process. But at the same time, we also require to work really hard to bring that political will. So we have seen states where we have good political will, and therefore we see good results. And I think that's very important over and above what is already said by our esteemed panelists. And I think one of the things is that we require lots of blended knowledge in terms of demystifying science for these local communities to be able to understand what we are talking as HDP Nexus or otherwise, or any other topic. But it is also important to recognize their traditional knowledge, their social context, blend it with the science, blend it with the expertise, bring experts to the local level more and more for them to bring that solution. So yeah, the quick words are just that, over and above what is being already mentioned. Thank you.
Really important point to end with. Thank you so much, and thank you to all our speakers and to the local and national actors that inputted into the research behind this event. I'm just going to pass to my colleague May to close. Thank you all.
Okay. Before we close, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today for keeping the discussion alive with your comments and questions in the chat. Sadly, we only have an hour for this event, so we have very limited time for the Q&A, but we will try to respond to unanswered questions in follow-up email. Thanks so much to our speakers, Nanette, Shivangi, the Dean, Marie and Corey, to my co-moderator Jen, and the rest of the ALNAP colleagues who have been working in the background to make this learning event a success. Thank you, everyone. Please don't forget to check out and register to ALNAP's other sessions at the HNPW. Have a good day, everyone, and happy Women's Month.